Welcome back. And of course, we are discussing oil and gas as that means that should help us recover economically, and looking at that through the prism of our policies. And to discuss this with me and more is an expert, an oil and gas expert, Dr. Wisdom Enang. Welcome once again to Political Spectrum, Spectrum Television. If you could hear me. We are looking at the situation. First of all, let's put the elephant in the room out of the room. The queues are back, even though Dangote has commenced production of PMS. Why do you think this is?
I think can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Right, thank you. I think one of the things that we need to understand about the queues that have emerged is that we have a very, very serious supply problem. And that's one of the things that we need to take cognizance of. The supply problem happens to be, as the NNC people put it, because there is an issue with being able to keep up with their debt obligations, and which of course means that international suppliers are opting for cash or crude cargoes in equivalent to be able to give us refined products. And so the NNPC are now in where there's over a $6 billion debt on ground, which they've not been able to clear out, which they have now admitted to, by the way. And of course, we also have the issue that those guys are not going to supply. So there's a lot of queuing up, and those queues are not clearing anytime soon. But we're also waiting for Dangote, the savior of Nigeria, to come on board, produce, and distribute his own inventory, which he said between I think Tuesday and Friday that he would hit the ground running on distributing it to all the stations. So I think that's just the sort of thing that we're waiting for. But right now, those queues are as a result of the fact that there is an imminent supply problem that makes it very difficult for the NPC to get those import goods.
News reaching us is that there are about 3 vessels that are berthed in Lagos waiting to discharge their cargo. Perhaps that will bring some relief. But then again, looking at this story, which if you remember the time there was this bickering between NNPCL and Dangote with regards to the quota, the quantity of crude that was available to supply Dangote. Who would have known that NNPC had a shortfall and Dangote was begging them to meet their quota, what they had agreed to, and yet, even though they knew that they were indebted to the point of $6.8 billion US, that's about almost $7 billion US, they were still grandstanding.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, I think we still haven't gotten to a point where the NNPC realizes that it cannot operate in isolation. There are a number of issues that are coming up, and really we can look at and say, look, this is not right. One is the way the NNPC is going around making its decisions. On one hand, telling Nigerians that they're not aware of any substantial debt, and also saying that it is not uncommon to owe debt in the sector. But then you turn around a couple of weeks after to admit that you're owing debt, though the amount was not stated, but almost agreeing with the popular speculation that it's about $6.8 billion worth of debt. And at the same time, you are also not being able to supply the crude that you're supposed to supply to the Dangote refinery to get all the issues sorted out. At the same time, the NNPPRA, at the same time, are not really, at the initial point, they were having resistance in their attitude in trying to help to solve the problem. So what will I say? It's administrative oversight and negligence, regulatory rascality. I think that's the word I'm going to use, because I cannot explain why we're in a quagmire and then we are still having pride and lack of clarity and, of course, obscurity in getting out of that quagmire. To me, that doesn't really make any sense at all. And it's something that You see, this reveals systemic issues that we need to address. So even after we've been able to clear these queues, right, either by hook or by crook, however we clear these queues, we still need to go back to the drawing board and say, year in, year out, through some people's lifetimes, queues have been surfacing, and it's the same problem. How do we solve it once and for all? And I think this is the most systemic conversation that we should be having.
Talking about what you just raised, and looking at the agreement that is before us, it seems as if NNPC is going to be the sole buyer of Dangote products for the Nigerian market. How does this in any way aid in abating this situation, especially on the backdrop of the Nigerian petroleum policy direction that is supposed to be market-driven?
Yeah, I think, the thing is this, right? It's supposed to be market-driven, ultimately. But for me, I have to wear the hat of the administration of the PIA as well as the realities on ground. So let's just take let's contextualize what's going on ground. If we allow it to be market-driven, it's going to 1, 2, 1, 3. That's the truth of the matter. And Nigeria is going to be able to afford it. And I know this because that is what the sort of price equilibrium along the, West African corridor is coming to. And Nigeria is going to be able to afford it. The question is absolutely no. It's going to cause chaos. At the same time, let's even define what are the imperatives of a free market system. A free market system is where you have adequate supply to moderate the demand to be able to establish a fair price equilibrium. And that's what happens. So if you're not having enough supplies and you liberate the market almost completely, you are going to have a supplier's market. That means suppliers can come together and determine whatever the price is. So I think we're now caught up between a fully liberalized market and a monopoly, and then striking a balance is what the government has come up with, which is the monopsony. The monopsony is where they put a middleman there. It controls whatever happens, the interface between the Dangote refinery and the public, who are obviously the consumers. And that's really to create that buffer, more like a consumer protection. Because as I said, if you allow it to float, you're floating to 1,003, 1,004, and that's the reality. If we must stop, if we must ensure that it is in tandem with what we have in the West African corridor. But also remember, because we're not producing, the chances is going to be a supplier's market. Now
let's take some time and pull this apart. One of the reasons why you would say it would hit 1,400 naira would be because of the price in the international market, I guess. And then when you look at it again, one of the major reasons why the naira is where it is because of how much of it the dollar we use in importing this product. So for instance, we kill buying from outside and we reserve some of the crude oil generated foreign exchanges that we have and just concentrate on at least partially meeting our local demands. Don't you see a situation whereby the price of petrol will say play around the 600 naira margin, at least in the interim? Hello, Dr. Enang, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Did you hear the question, sir?
Yeah, absolutely.
So go ahead.
Let me start by giving you a fundamental, theory that every science student should relate with, and that is to say that energy cannot be created, not destroyed, but can be converted from one form to the other. What do I mean? You cannot create money in the sky. You can only convert it from one form to the other. So the question is, when you see things like that happen, the question is, what is the opportunity cost? Because you have to factor that in.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at the fact that the government is giving crude in naira, the opportunity cost is that we are inadvertently reducing our dollar earnings. So the question you're going to ask is, okay, in the short term, the benefit of losing your dollar earnings, which of course you would have also used it to increase your reserve, how does it compare with the idea of saying, let's sell it in dollars, or let's still go ahead with our business and let them source whatever they want to source from outside, and then we earn our dollars. So you're losing something and gaining something, essentially. So what I'm saying is that if you're asking me and saying, well, Doc, how exactly, what don't you think the benefits are going to accrue if we do not even, get to...
Oh, having some...
At the same time, we are also having the opportunity cost of losing dollars because we are giving it in Naira. So something is going for something, and we do not know the net effect. But what we do know is that because a lot of feedstock of the stock, if we can give, what we do know, sorry, is that if we can give the feedstock in Naira, that there will be some very good benefits of getting that feedstock in Naira and also lifting it in Naira. But the question is, how much of the feedstock can we actually give to make a difference? Are we going to be in a position that we can give the 450,000 barrels per day to the refineries? And also, what is the compensation factor that would brought into view from a pricing standpoint if the Dangote refinery on one particular month needs to source for international inventories, needs to get maybe volume? For some reason, we cannot give him even 200,000 on average per day, barrels per day, and it is abroad. That's just, there are a lot of questions. It's not like really clear to say, well, if we do this, it might reduce to 600, because when you're doing that, you have an opportunity cost, and economics is not just a unit economics. It's like there's a combination factor of a number of things that will come together to be able to determine the price of the crude. So we are giving out crude in Naira, but also losing our potential dollar earnings by doing that.
Some would say that perhaps on the other side of the argument would be that at some point in this country, we were producing 2.5 million barrels of crude per day. And here we are struggling with giving our local refiners 200,000 barrels per day. And on the flip side, of course, is also the argument that if we're able to push the crude that is demanded by Dangote, the product will not only be used in Nigeria, but also will be exported, and we will all in turn get foreign exchange. How does that play out in your calculation?
Well, so I'm going to tell you for free that there are some sort of, when you look at an economic projection, you almost want to look at, is this an optimist model or is this a pessimist model, right? And sometimes you want to strike a balance. An optimist model is to say, well, I'm going to start a farm. But guess what? Not only am I going to feed my family, I'm going to expand to feed Akwa Ibom State, and at some point I'm going to feed the world. Man, that's the model. That's okay. But your assumptions, if we begin to text the reality index of your assumptions, we'll find out that a lot of it is very flawed fundamentally. Let's even get somewhere first. In my lifetime, I'll be excited to see us even meet the Nigerian consumption quota. And then we begin to talk about outside, because I don't want us to begin to use futuristic factors to determine more of the decisions that we take today. And at the same time, we are building an overly optimist model that is not going to pan out from a reality standpoint. How excited are you when you hear that the Port Harcourt refinery is going to start up in May? It's going to start up in June. It's going to start up in July. It's going to start up in August. That's an optimistic model. Has it started up in reality? No. We strike a balance between the optimism and the reality, and that's why I tell people, always have a cautious optimism. And when you're doing your sensitivity analysis, ensure that you've covered the broad spectrum of best and the worst case scenario, and that your governing case for your risk management, of course, which you're trying to achieve to make sure it is as low as reasonably probable, is your worst case scenario. Do not build your risk management on the best case scenario. It's going to fail.
Well, very well laid out there, which even beggars that question. The intentions and the motive of those who drive this sector
to make a choice like the rest of the world. Now you're asking me, how did we even get here? I think that's what your first question is.
Yeah.
It is commonsensical to know that. It's just like, I'll give you an analogy. A man has an inheritance in an account and chooses that every day he's going to dip into that inheritance and be eating and be eating and be eating without doing an investment that will bring some returns and give him money so that at least the capital can be preserved. Now, such a man is having what we call a run to failure. And if you're having a run to failure, what that means is that it's only a matter of time that you're going to find yourself in a failure mode. What does that mean? What happens throughout the year? So what should we have done before? Before the enactment of the PIA, it is only commonsensical, right? Why do we have savings in our families? We have savings so that if there are any eventualities, we can dip our hands into the savings and address the problem. What should the economic manager should have done from day one was to put out certain funds untouched, and those funds were meant to do things like...
Are you still there? Oh, Dr. Enang, having challenge with the network there. Can you still hear me? Oh, well, making some very valid points with regards to the oil economy and our projections and our posturing with regards to managing both domestic demand and international obligations. I'm sure we're trying to get him back, raising some very significant issues, taking a look at the systemic challenges that we have in the petroleum sector. But then, yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you now. Please finish your thoughts. Yeah.
That ab initio, you're asking me, how did we get here and what is the solution? The thing is, from a production standpoint, it's not something you go overnight to correct. It is something like I'm asking, you find out that some families have an agreement and they say, let's keep some savings away. Those savings are not what you touch every day. Those savings are for special intervention. What are the special interventions that we should have looked at, that we've now seen retrospectively? We've seen that crude oil theft is one of the interventions that we need at this moment. Technology upgrade is another one. Facility reliability upgrade is another one. We also know right now that we also need to do what we call primary and secondary interventions to improve our production prospects as the well decreases. And most importantly, we also know that we ought to have been exploring new frontiers and adding it to our production based on proven volumes. But this is not something you do overnight. This is something that the economic manager should have thought of decades ago and said, for every penny we spend in the oil and gas sector, let's leave 10%, 5% in a fund that nobody can touch until we have critical circumstances like this. We shouldn't be found wanting at this point. So my point is, we have a legacy problem that has ensued a number of decades. But how are we going to solve it? Because I think that's what you're asking for.
Yeah. Oh, some challenges there. Well, that's actually what I'm asking for. But then again, I'm sure he's... Yeah.
I'm doing primary and secondary recovery.
Okay. Fair point. You know, that issue we just raised just a few years ago, we had the Goodluck Jonathan trying to put together some sovereign fund, and I remember that a majority of the governors fought against that effort, and at some point it went south. And yes, we have things like the excess crude account that perhaps should have been by law pushed in that direction. I'm sure that's what you're talking about. Very fair point. But we are where we are. I was also talking on the issue of whether we can trust the players or those who are leading the sectors to have our best interests at heart. Because on one hand, we are looking at, okay, this is a situation where mistakes have been made in the past, but I'm sure that some people are trying to correct the mistakes. Or, on the other hand, it wasn't even a mistake in the first place. Perhaps it was designed like this to facilitate, to what end, I wouldn't know, the devastation that we are facing today. For instance, you raised that issue of why is it that we are stuck at 30-something billion barrels proven reserve for probably 20 years? How come that we've not been able to add new oil finds to our quota? These are very valid questions. But let me let you rest on that case. How do we, say for instance, what do we need to do? We've talked about security. You've raised the issue of oil theft. But what do we need to do, for instance, to clear our portfolio and allow it, how will I put it, allow it to be inviting as it used to be? So, for instance, we don't have ELF going to Angola to invest $2-point-something billion.
The truth is, understand that we're right, and we're trying to enhance our what we call physical attractiveness in the sector. But we need to acknowledge that we're playing catch up. Now, I'll tell you another thing that the government has done. The government has said, okay, let's tilt the balance. Rather than promoting signature bonuses, let's promote more of production bonuses, which is we get more money when you produce. And that means that money should have paid the signature bonus, which was about $200 million before. You just paid $10 million for work of the field and put that money to developing your field. But what that means is if you're not developing your field, they will get it. I think from a policy standpoint, we're beginning to have the best language. But are we, basically it's medicine after death. But I like to say, so that it doesn't look so gloomy, medicine after coma. So you are really in the transition phase. You could slip into death or you could slip out of coma. It's a 50-50 chance. Actually, more than that, it's a 70-30 chance. The chances of death is quite high. But are we doing something? The answer is yes. Are we playing catch up? The answer is yes. Do we have experts that should have told us that this was a potential problem and begin to fix it? The answer is yes. Did we listen to those experts or even bring them into the room to have the conversation? The answer is no. Yeah. Was it designed this way for some reason? I would not have the answer to that because I do not know what their intent was. Could it have been an oversight? Could everyone have missed it? Because you have to look at what the website dictionary says, that common sense is rarely common in one of his quotes. So you find out, well, was it a missed common sense or was it really engineered in a way that would benefit certain people? I mean, to be honest, only them, God and their conscience will tell what they were designing. But right now, we're the big mess, and I think we can undo all of that by having the right guys have the conversation. There are very smart Nigerians, for God's sake, very, very smart ones, who can have this conversation. They've conquered a lot of the space. I think I looked somewhere in Venezuela, and Alpha Eze is actually developing one of their major fields in Venezuela, who is a very big billionaire in Nigeria. And the question is, that is to show you the extent to which Nigerians are ready to conquer this space. We have mastered it and we're now going global. The question is, before we even attempt to fix our problem, what is our mindset? Do we have a globally competitive mindset? And to what extent are we applying it to our own solutions? Because you don't want, on one hand, a Nigerian that is so skilled is disadvantaged in home country, but goes abroad, puts the same skill sets out there, and is being glorified. We've seen this happen in the athletics. So the question is, are we ready for change? That is the first mindset that will drive the real change that we're looking at.
We've spent so much time talking about oil that even the major issue in the room, of course, well, that was an elephant, of course. But what we really wanted to talk about is gas. And I want us to just spend the last moment of our time to talk about gas, which perhaps is more promising than crude oil, looking at the fact that we have about the 8th largest reserve in the world, I would say, some people would say. And this is an opportunity. And what comes to mind is this investment in the Africa-Europe pipeline. Only a few days ago, the Ijaw People's Congress president came out to disavow that project and say that the locals weren't taken along in that project. And at some point, we were thinking it was heading in the direction of Algeria, but it seems as if it's now heading in the direction of Morocco. Can you unpack what's playing out to the best you can?
Yeah, I think, there are issues around, of course, the local host communities, and we've also had issues around funding in the past on that project. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Whatever the issues are, I do not have those details. I will not dive into them. But what I would say is that those projects is going to help us with gas exportation. So you might think about this, that the government is saying, well, whilst we free up the oil for the domestic refineries for sale in Naira, how quickly can we bring other cash cows up, whether it is gas or whether it is exportation of petrochemicals and fertilizers? How quickly can we bring some of these other cash cows to make up for any shortfall in our exportation maybe quota that is not being met by the oil that we're going to be giving out to the domestic refineries? So I'm thinking about it like it's almost a multi-pronged approach to say, let's quickly get some cash cows out of the way so that we can have a lot more money to do what we want to do from an FX standpoint.
Is there a possibility that we are also, or particularly this project, is caught up in some geopolitical intermingling? Because when you look at Algeria, Morocco, and their politics with regards to their backers, and you put Russia, China, and all of these players in that basket, is this a situation whereby this project may be threatened by geopolitics?
Of course, we always have geopolitics playing. I mean, it's happening in Tanzania, a pipeline project there. So there's always geopolitics playing a role. We cannot rule that out. But you see, whoever alleges must prove. But so without the hindsight of any proof, we cannot begin to allege. But of course, we do know that with the top guys, the top controllers in the room, or puppeteers in the room, which is USA, Russia, and China, you can expect that there's going to be some power play at the end of the day. With not even the backers, sometimes we're also having conversations around. We've heard, David Hodain did allude to the fact that an international, NGO reached out to him to write something to, kind of a smear campaign against the Dangote refinery. So these are all things that are very possible. These are all things that we can expect. And this is why we keep talking about having funding source, maybe an African Energy Bank that can perhaps fund itself. Otherwise, we're still, we're still the grass that will suffer once these three elephants begin to fight.
You just picked the words out of my mouth, because I was about to ask as we close, the murkiness that has surrounded the funding of this gas project really leaves so much to be desired.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things, and as I said, beggar has no choice. Whoever pays the piper detects the tune. So sometimes, but think about it, are we not victims of the same thing? Think about it. Ask yourself, what is the plan of the Tinubu-led administration? Is to liberalize the market, but more so in a way that conforms with what the World Bank and the IMF are asking for. So the question is this: we have different policies, very, very right-wing policies, and those policies are quite tough on Nigerians, but they make the World Bank happy enough to give us single-digit loans, billions of dollars of loans. But there's more to that. The question is, are the World Bank more interested in helping Nigeria than the Nigerians themselves? First question.
Wow, very fair.
Okay, you're asking the World Bank is giving us direction. Do they realize the realities on ground that Nigeria is really complicated with a lot of ethnicity problems, with a lot of economic structural problems? Do they really have clarity on the? I give you context. Just looking at the psychology of the average Nigerian, we've perceived, we've had 34% inflation, and we did not revolt as bad as Kenyans had the 7% inflation, and they went to the street, and a lot of people died. But look at it, Nigerians were able to endure up to 34%. Kenyans could not even endure 7%. Go check the record. 7% inflation is why they went into the streets, and a lot of violence and killings happened. So you have to take this cognizance. Does the World Bank know that about the average reaction of the average Nigerian and how the psychology of the Nigerians run? And the question is, when we take policies of the World Bank or IMF, when it comes to implementation, because you have policy design, policy implementation, and policy outcomes. And at the implementation and outcome phase, you begin to find out that we inherited a lot of things that we did not understand how to apply them in the Nigerian context. So, it's also playing out. I'm sorry to say that we are all victims of some of these giant room, you making us do their own digging.
Well, that teases us back to that question I raised, is this by design? Sorry, we're out of time, and a really engaging conversation. I'm certain that I'll really love to have you back so that we can continue to prove the direction where these thoughts lead us to. Mr. President is in China, and one of the things that he's coming back with is some agreement that has to do with nuclear energy. Perhaps this also is one of those things we could throw into our energy portfolio and see how we can create policies that will aid Nigerians. Dr. Wisdom Enang, really wise, an expert in oil and gas. Thank you for your contributions on Political Spectrum this morning.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Well, that's how far we can go today. Nigerians are still in the queues. Let's see how that plays out. We know that Dangote started production. We also know that there are 3 vessels berthed in Apapa port. Perhaps they are offloading their cargo. Let's see how that trickles down into the supply chain and how that aids the Nigerian as it manages 34% inflation, 40% food inflation, insecurity, and many other things. For me, it's goodbye. If you can, stay behind some of our programs and enjoy yourself the best you can. Goodbye.